asked what I was doing. What are you doing? And we'll talk about me after that. Boom.
So yeah, absolutely. So I run a thing called the Office of American Possibilities, which is basically a social and civic ventures studio. So that's a fancy way of saying a company that launches companies. Basically, our latest project's a thing called In Pursuit, where we did a debrief of 250 years of presidential history by four former presidents, all of the existing presidential centers, seven Pulitzer Prize winning historians. Basically, the idea is like everyone always says America is an experiment, but the whole thing with an experiment is you have to like debrief it. So this was kind of our comprehensive effort to do that. And I'm launching a social impact AI deployment fund designed to
Interesting.
use frontier models against publicly available data sets to kind of just solve like blocking and tackling long-standing social and civic challenges
Uh-huh.
that were like really hard when you had to hire like 8 Estonian software developers to do the data analysis, but now they can do like really easily. So the use case that I like to talk about is how long does it take your mayor to like fill a pothole? Like all of that information exists on a database, but like no one knows the answer because it's a pain to find.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's trivially easy to build a tool that just tells you that for like every polity in America, right? Um, Luke, who just joined us, actually is one of the folks that we've looked to invest in. He basically built a wildfire evacuation app in South Dakota that his sheriff's department uh, has adopted as like their official way of getting people out of a natural disaster. So one of the many dope folks that we've been looking to support.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. There was a window where I was like, how do you help people? And so I was looking at there are people in San Francisco who are not just capitalists that are trying to essentially try to help governments and
Shockingly.
whatnot.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so, yeah, the GovTech group was interesting to me for a while. Um, yeah, I ended up going to into mental health instead.
Oh, interesting.
And that was surprising to me. Like, it was basically you could get a ton of money to take studies from 1950 and just put them into an app. You know what I mean? As a service, you're like,
Oh, totally.
here's cognitive behavioral therapy, and then you're just going to answer the questions that are in the book, and we're going to make $1 billion on it. It was really like, this is nothing. It's really bizarre.
That's surreal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a $1 billion company. But
Right, exactly. You're like, I
yeah,
can't believe that this is actually as successful as as it
just
as
read
it
the
is.
book. It's in the book. But yeah, I mean, that is a business. Like, what information isn't out there that would allow you? Now it has to be outlier information, probably, because AI models will have everything. But yeah,
Have you also been getting hit up in the intervening 20 years by people with requests to quote gamify approximately anything and everything without necessarily like knowing what that word means?
not anymore. That was like 15 years ago. 15 years ago when Zynga was going, that was like a huge word. Um, Now I don't hear it because I live in the woods and I don't talk to anyone who would say that. Like, I get to control who comes on this podcast, and like none of those people are here.
That's
You know who you
amazing.
are, wherever you are.
Where do you live in the woods?
I live near Skywalker Ranch, so
Oh,
I
really?
live.
Oh, sick.
Yeah, I live where animals are. There's horses nearby. Sometimes we'll have peacocks and turkeys, and deer will cross the road, and foxes and bobcats, things like that. I'm
Did
Radagast.
did you did you ever work with Noah Falstein by any chance?
No, but I've heard
Uh,
that
he was
name.
he was an old LucasArts guy. Anyway, he just started working at the George Lucas Educational Foundation yesterday.
Oh,
But he was
nice.
just out at Skywalker Ranch and was talking about it. So Skywalker Ranch has been on my mind.
Yeah, the future of education interests me for sure. I was talking with an investor a couple months ago about something I had been talking about exploring, which I've been exploring in the background.
Oh
Anyway, I
yeah,
think venture in particular is very interested in where education will go.
of course.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah, it's interesting. We spent a lot of time figuring out how humans learn and how what they need to learn. So changing it too much seems a little dangerous, but we'll see.
I was so that's actually exciting to talk about, right? Because
Yeah.
like policy people, tech people, product people, AI people are all like very fascinated about what that portends for like the future of education. There's obviously like
Hmm.
the Alpha School people and Pamela Hobart and all those people. Um, to your point, there's like the experience dimension, the learning dimension, the institutional dimension that are all like very difficult to disaggregate. And I think everybody who comes at the question from one of those angles kind of thinks that their angle, or even if they don't think it, it's kind of hard to avoid, is like necessarily the most important angle. But it's really hard to disaggregate each of those things, and it's really hard to change the course of that ship. I'm curious, are you the kind of like, do you think that there is a revolution brewing in education over the next like decade? Or do you think we're going to see, more or less more of the same?
Yeah, I saw my daughters. My daughters are 8 and 10, and my oldest was looking, I think, at a
That's,
boggle board or playing with some game.
yep.
And she was like 2001: A Space Odyssey with it. Like she's, a monkey at the monolith, and that's what's required to learn each step of the way. So it's I don't see how you're going to bypass that. You're like the human has to like knock at the stone 1,000 times, right? And so, there's just I talked to someone who is deep down the well of early education, Carla Engelbrecht,
Oh,
earlier
interesting.
on the
Yeah, of
series, and
course.
she was, there's certain people develop in certain ways, and so education wants to tailor to that. She spends a lot of her time trying to figure out how to make social media work for kids as they're developing such that they see the
Interesting.
right things in the right ways. But I definitely think it has to be crafted around the people, and so most of those people you described were not going to care about the people. In which case, like, I'm unlikely to agree with them if they're trying to make people stronger, better, right? That's my impression. But you know different things than me. I just saw my daughter play Boggle and go through the motions, and she's a very smart 10-year-old. But it's like she's still like at the monolith, right?
No, I think that's like the act of friction itself is like materially relevant to the act of learning. I think that like something with a really good product that's like very related to game design, obviously, is like the ability to kind of path people up the interest curve with enough like friction of engagement that they like retain what it is they're doing. I also think that like the ability
It's a
to,
dangerous word, actually.
well, of course, right?
No, retain
Because,
is a dangerous word because if you get addicted
oh,
to
say more.
progress, you don't go through the hard challenges that actually allow you to grow, right? So it ends up being this real tension.
Totally. And then like also like is the most legible thing the most important thing? Like that's by no means obvious. And yet often when we're trying to engineer something, we're focused on like what's most legible for us to perceive and what axis of progress is most straightforward to model, right? Now, I think like I'm receptive to the fact that like in a lot of classrooms, the answer is just like, well, let's do none of that and like hope it works, right? Which I don't think is like an especially great approach either. But
Mhm,
I often, when I was in New York City, we ran an organization called the Future Project that was all about helping young people discover and pursue their passion and purpose. And the
mhm,
thesis of that organization, which I've seen compound and play out many, many, many times, is that like engagement and just like caring, like about your life, about the world, is like way more upstream of any like downstream granular learning outcome, right? It's like,
mhm,
who are you? What matters to you? What are you going to do about it? And I think that like a lot of what is going on in a traditional classroom is using, social capital, is using social status, is
mhm,
using behavioral inertia, is using community formation to kind of be a proxy for, okay, well, maybe if you don't care about this intrinsically, you'll
mhm.
care about it for some sort of adjacent reason, right? And people criticize that of like, oh, it should be about like the love of learning. But like, if the love of learning is not what wakes you up abstractly every morning as like a teenager, you, you don't need to just get like left behind, right?
Yeah.
So I'm often not necessarily skeptical, but I think just surprised at how incomplete a very like Neil Stevenson young ladies illustrated primer model is for what it takes to actually get people to learn. I think that tends to work very well for the kind of people that are like self-motivated to read 1,200-page science fiction novels. But
Yes.
but most people are not like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, like if you're thinking at that, this is where a lot of, I'm sure, darker strains of thinking exist now, where it's like just take the people who have the propensity to do that and train them to lead people, and that's what we're seeing, right? Sort of just find people with potential and invest in them, and not anyone else.
Yeah, and I think I mean, my entire life was made possible because of gifted education, and so I very much like value that and understand the potential of it and think it matters a lot. I just
Hmm.
also think that we can see the limitations of all of that, right? Like you have, uh, I think many people, regardless of political persuasion, would probably say that like Elon Musk has more IQ points than President Donald J. Trump. Nevertheless,
It's a good bet.
President
Can we
Donald
bet on
J.
that?
Trump has, yeah, I was going to say, yeah, can we get a poly market going on
Yeah,
for any of
I
this?
would bet on that now. Yeah.
Yeah, and nevertheless, President Donald J. Trump has been vastly more politically successful than Elon Musk, right?
Hmm.
I think that, like, we see with a lot of the frontier models and the battle to get public buy-in and clout to what it is they're offering, you have a lot of like very, very, very intelligent people that are failing in like very, very, very basic ways, sort of level zero college level public trust building public comms things, right? So the idea that like, oh, we're going to anoint one particular faction of people and they're going to just omni rule all of the relevant things, I think we have a lot of disconfirming evidence to showcase just doesn't really work that way.
Hmm. Why do we do anything we do? Like, what are we working towards as people? Does it matter what people want? These are questions I ask for you because I ask them all the time. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
do we have like some take on where we're going as a people? Does it matter, or is it just YOLO? Someone goes in a direction, and that's the purpose, regardless of what the rest of the population wants.
I think it vastly and deeply matters.
Mm,
I'm very long on humanity. I'm very long on optimism. I think cynicism and naivety are not mutually exclusive. I
mm,
think a lot of takes that are sort of like self-confirmingly, knowingly cynical are basically exercises in self-indulgence. Um, I think the journey is to create meaning from experience, right? Like we all get to inhabit some amount of time, and we do so in the context of like a psyche, and we engage with the world, we engage with media, we engage with other people, and the thing that we get to direct, the medium that is the artist, the medium of the artistry we paint is the
mm.
medium of attention, right? We get to choose where to direct our attention and whether what we're directing it at is valuable. And I think that one of the things that is challenging is that, I'm not a romanticist from the past, but I think there have been a lot of ways where what to create purpose and belonging out of have been very legible, right? Like
Yeah, exactly.
here's a superstructure, here's a cosmology,
How does it
do
form
these
now?
things.
To me, like
Exactly.
I'm an optimist too, and I would guess in our lifetimes, certainly my kids' lifetimes, like the hardships that we're facing now will smooth out some. But I do think there's a question of what the marketing shape is, where the political parties have to think about this all the time because you can message. We all have a connected brain. Like, how do Genghis Khan didn't have to compete like in this extra sphere of like anyone can act in an like without accountability, right? So there's some
Right.
question of like what structure does it take to have like humans move in a direction that's coherent instead of because it's not happening now, right? You have Trump who's a clown, and then you have people puppeting him who want to basically make businesses out of all the public services that we have. So it's like how do you get to a place where humans are more conscious of where we're all trying to go together?
So I mean, this is where like culture matters a lot, but this is also where like meaning providing cultural worldviews matter a lot. I was just in the Balkans for a month, and something that I think like if you come out of the European context, that you often get like more of an appreciation for than we have in the U.S. for like a variety of path dependent reasons, is like the idea of nationhood as like a meaning providing like identity that fosters like belonging and it fosters like a sense of kind of collective like enactment of a narrative. It's just like insanely common when you're in somewhere like Serbia or Croatia or Montenegro for people to be talking about stuff that happened like 700 years ago,
Yeah.
like it was yesterday, right? Like, oh, Stepan Nemanja when he like fought the Ottoman, you know, and the kind of thing where it's like, oh, my nature as a person is tied to these historic events that happen on like an epochal time scale, and that by definition connects you to stuff that is outside your own limited uh, uh, aperture of time, outside your own limited aperture of place. You know, we went into this monastery where like the grave of the founder of the Serbian Orthodox Church was buried. And the act of seeing that and you know going and kissing the that allows you to very tangibly participate in this massive narrative arc that your grandparents participate in, that your grandkids will participate in, that the people that architected the story of who you are participated in long before you even knew them. And I don't, you know, the downside from my sort of irritating secular perspective is that like the bummer about all that is that like none of it matters real or is substantial, right? But nevertheless, replacing that with nothing is just an
It's
inadequate
what
answer,
like
right?
it's what money wants it to be, right? It ends up being very much so. This was a real tension for Andreessen Horowitz was one of our big investor, our lead
Oh, really?
investor, our last company.
Interesting.
And you know, they're doing a lot of things that are pro country and anti really pro them, right? In the sense of like all the things they're doing make them money regardless of whether like the country comes together, and there's nothing in their messaging that makes it seem like they really care about the country coming together at all, right?
So
And that
can
ends
I
up being
respond to
really
that?
interesting. Yeah.
So one of the things I always think is very interesting about Andreessen is they have this American dynamism portfolio, right?
Hmm.
That kind of blends together national security, natalism, sort of an overtly like again I'll use like bolstering language, but like a very state capacity forward vision that somebody who's kind of an unironic American patriot like myself ought to get really excited about.
It's
And then
really
like
exciting out there. Yeah. I mean, I like
in
the
theory, right,
messaging quite a bit. I like the notion quite a bit. Yeah.
right, and then you break it
But why are
down and
you
you're
the
like,
one doing this? Yeah.
and it right, and you compare it to like I was at a thing at the at one of the DC think tanks or whatever, where the Andreessen people were like saying with a straight face, they're like, the future of American AI is inextricable from the future of Bitcoin. You know, and like I got yelled at for audibly laughing at that claim, right? You know, it's like
Yeah.
when someone is being so brazenly cynical as to like impugn their entire credibility, that casts a shadow on anything they say, not just in
Yeah.
general, but particularly about values,
It's
right?
hard to trust someone who's elected, you know, Trump to run the country again. It's, you know what I mean? Like, how can we trust you to be the one in charge of this thing?
So,
We can't, right? They
so how do you
fundamentally can't.
think?
Yeah, trust them.
I'm curious what you think about this because you're talking about trust.
Hmm.
My diagnosis is that like one of the most important things going on in the country and the culture and everything right now is this question of trust, who we trust, and how do we form trust. And I think that lots of people everywhere on the political spectrum feel like their trust has been just irrevocably violated, and they have
Hmm.
no idea not only how to get it back, but what it would even take to get it back. And I'm curious from your perspective, what do you think? A, do you agree with any of that? B, do you think any of that's relevant? And C, what do you think is going on there?
I mean, I think it depends on what scale of thinking you're familiar with. If you're familiar with the many faced God, that's really common here, where you have to have all the faces for all the scenarios that you enter, then like, yeah, you can get to a place where you're like, I trust this enough for, you know, I'm seeing the behaviors that I need. I find it really polarizing with A16Z because I like a lot of the people there. And
Totally.
when I hear Mark Andreessen speak, it's like, he might be fun to talk to, but he doesn't hear what he's saying, and it's,
Interesting.
he doesn't understand his marketing, no matter who is helping him market. I
Mm.
think actually almost all the billionaires that I'm aware of that I know, like, have the same problem where they just don't really understand how distasteful a lot of what they say is. Um, and there's just they can't relate to people anymore. But again,
Mm.
it's like there are good aspects to having Andreessen, like, invest in the country, but the country isn't investing in the country, and so it feels like the financiers have won in the end, where, like, 100 years ago, you would have, like, some sort of counterbalance, in theory. It feels like that's gone.
That's also interesting to me because one of the things that, like, it's totally not intuitive, for example, that I think like quote unquote billionaires would be especially salient in the discourse, right? Like if you look at like
Mhm,
20th century culture, you see this like ebb and flow of like how much like people could even like name prominent business people, right? And yet like we're at this moment right now where like the intersection of wealth and celebrity actually both kind of seem to be at the zenith at the exact same time.
mhm.
And yet by like many measures, we're actually, you know, more economically prosperous than ever before, not just objectively but relatively. And yet I think that the discrepancy is still like a trigger point for like millions and millions and millions of people. My kind of contention is if we had this sort of Reed Richards, you know, benevolent like sense of sort of omnipresent trust, the actual level of like magnitudinal distinction would like not bother people nearly as much as it does in the world where so many people who are so influential and so powerful also seem so vastly not only out of touch but just kind of agnostic of the needs, wants,
It's
desires,
not their
hungers, and
responsibility.
aspirations of regular people.
They feel like, "Oh, whatever happened," like, Andreessen, I listened to his podcast recently where he's talking about social media, and he's like, "Oh, people are just distracting themselves, and, isn't that interesting? It's better than them hurting each other." And it's just like an absurd narrative. And it's like, you're not accountable for any of the things that you're putting pressure on people to do. That's nonsense. And the fact that you never take accountability for everything makes me think you shouldn't be the one doing your job.
And I think that that's occurring at a moment where, you know, one can imagine a counterfactual where there's this like super robust democratic accountability and institution. There was like a very high functioning, you know, state, local, federal legislature that people felt like their vote and participation could actuate to like countermand all that. But that's just the opposite of the scenario where we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
A story I like to tell is that you know, I'm from Memphis. I go back, you know, periodically, talk to my family. They're very much from Memphis, you know, very working class, salt the earth type people. So I always love just kind of talking. You know, they know I live in DC, so they love to jibe me about politics and vice versa or whatever. So I was talking with a relative of mine, and he was kind of like, you know, like the problem with America is socialism. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Like, what do you mean by that? Right. And he was basically saying, well, you see, like all these companies, the heads of, you know, he was naming Bill Gates, I think, but he was, you know, all these companies have too much power and they're too rich and they can get whatever it is they want. And that's bad because we're on the receiving end of that. We've got to make sure that they have less power. And that's why I hate socialism. Right. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Usually when people say socialism, they talk about, you know, government overreach and government
Yeah.
power and you know and the scale of government and what it can do. It seems like you're using it in a different way. He's like, no. You don't understand. Like they're all the same, right? Like from his perspective, socialism, billionaires, whatever it is all about like the man, and then there's us, and the fundamental issue is just the man's amount of leverage relative to us, right? And whether that's the private sector or government or Hollywood or social media was like a much less relevant distinction than the magnitudinal difference between the man and all of us who were sitting down eating dinner. And I felt like that was like deeply and profoundly revealing.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I can feel in the background that there's not a story that we can hold to, right? We're on Substack, it's the land of stories. And it's interesting that they kind of did you ever see Century of the Self?
I've not seen Century of the Self. What is that?
Yeah. So it's about 20 years old now, and it maybe 25. And it's a four-part documentary about how propaganda has been used by the United States to control thought. And like the self is very similar to how
Mm,
Century of the Self is very similar to how like they would keep everyone isolated so that mobs wouldn't form to essentially keep the peace. But when you think about media and journalism and you think about the Substack mission, like you'll see them promoting this notion of, hey, we'll give everyone their pulpit to say whatever they
mm.
want and have a newsletter that they own, but it actually undercuts any sense of like us having a story that we can all have and share together. And to me, like having that story is something that's kind of essential to going the direction, and that's where A16Z, with all its, both good and bad intentions, fails because only we will know that exists, right?
And I think that question in national story is like really important, right? So like in DC, where like I'm friends with a lot of like political pundits or whatever, you kind of have this tension between like where my like soul and energy is, and
Mhm.
like where I like intellectually understand like operates how like people feel and what we want, right? So like I'll be talking with the policy analyst that I really like, or like a policymaker I really like, and like we're all very committed to this idea that the point of government is to like deploy policies and execute governance that bring about good outcomes for people, like within the context of a given issue, right? And like I firmly believe that that's the endeavor that like is why I got into this space. And yet just like factually, that is just not what animates a given person's participation in politics, where it's like, okay, this is about an expression or an instantiation of values, or it's about how I want to feel as a person in the context of my country, or who I think ought to be in charge for some sort of aesthetic or moral reason, any number of which are just as viable reasons to participate in politics as actuating policy outcomes for some population. I think the bummer is when we look at our actual mechanics of politics, legislatures, executive branch agencies, state level agencies, benefits administrators, law enforcement, whatever it is, the
There's a
actual
lot of friction.
mechanics,
Yeah.
there's a lot of friction, but there's also like a lot more mechanics designed that like we can get you a Snapchat. um, Changing culture or the way that you feel about yourself or the way that your group presents on the national stage relative to other groups is like not really as much a function of those mechanics, even if they are a function of our participation in political society. And so I think that creates, as a function of politics as political salience, just a lot of disappointment in the scope of things.
Yeah, I think that's true for sure. I think there's some question in my mind where is there a lattice of the stories you wish were true, or that the different groups could it would be interesting to be able to visualize the different needs for different groups to have a sense
Mm.
of like um, what the stories need to be in different scenarios, and then how to design within those stories. I think that would be a pretty interesting exercise.
Get me started there. Can you riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think. Well, one easy way to frame it is, oh, I have my personal need, I have my family need, I have my community
Mm.
need, I have my county need, state need, and you just essentially have the story of how it needs to feel, how the relationship between A needs to interface with B, and then C, and then D, and then understand that from the different vantage points, and get an idea for where the stories are lacking and not. Somehow that story needs to be communicated in a way that people can understand without losing it, right? Uh,
That's really interesting. It reminds me of like during the Obama era, like all of the Obama campaign people gave all these trainings to like every social entrepreneur that was like story of us, story of self, story of now, right? You like talk about like what animates you, you connect it to like a broader community, and then you make, explicit like why all of that involves like some call to action that like needs to take place in this moment in time. And I think that that like does a nice clean wrap up version of like connecting like the macro to the micro and making the individual feel like they can participate in something broader than the self. I think the thing about why that works so uniquely well with Obama was, a combination of coming post Bush, a combination of having the first black president, a combination of having a person named Barack Hussein Obama being president, sort of self evidently testified to the fact that like an individual participation in that was doing something that had never done before. Like even if you didn't agree with it, right? I
Mhm.
think that's one reason, it felt potent in sort of a descriptive way, before you've even had one conversation about like the Affordable Care Act or anything else like that. I think now those pathways into the connection of each of those levels you mentioned, the self, the family, the region, the school, whatever, are just so much less legible and they've eroded so much, right?
Mhm.
One of my favorite things about moving from New York City out here to DC was like, for the first time in a decade, I had like talked to my neighbors, right? Like
Yeah.
our
Yeah,
neighbors
yeah.
invited my wife and I to like drink champagne on the roof. And it was like seeing a divine revelation, right? It's like, oh, people like actually do this. And so without a lot of those just sort of weak like fascia, like the mortar between the bricks, I think it's more illegible than ever to see like, okay, how do I, my little self sitting here on a couch or on this Substack, um, actually partake in something that like even is able to perturb, the next ring out, like my neighborhood, much less like the world, right? And I think one reason that it's so seductive to spend so much time in digital spaces is that like there is more legibility there, right? It's like, oh,
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
on Discord playing games with someone in Belgium. The downside though, being that those bonds don't persist the second that you turn the power off, right?
Yeah, it's been interesting, this project. You asked me before we started, like, "Why are you doing this?" If
Yeah,
anyone's here
yeah,
for,
yeah.
like, to talk about games,
I was gonna say
uh,
we need to tell some like magic design stories at some point. They
we
give the
will,
people
it
what
just
they want.
happened. Yeah, I mean, I think they want both. Who doesn't? Let's just combine them both into one thread. I was kind of interested. There are a few things. One, like, why am I doing this project? Another is like, how does your brain work? Like, Substack
Mm.
is unique. I always worry about like Mike Flores. If he's like, sometimes you'll see like people that you don't expect, like Frank Kusamoto, like reading your silly comments or whatnot, and then you'll write like longer pieces that are more interesting. That's just how my brain works. I did that on Facebook, and I would post both, and then like Chris Pikula and Pete Rajanich were like, "I don't understand what you're these little jokes are killing me." And so, like, how does your brain work? And then I'll talk about what we're doing here. How does like is Substack how your brain works, where you come up with little like weird like how
I'm
does
a
it come
pretty
out?
big fan of Substack. So
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned like magic articles. Like I was talking with V about this. I think that like before content marketing was like a thing, we
Mhm.
had like Star City and Dojo and Brainburst and Mind Ripper, and it was like, oh, like we're writing essay, which like when I started writing for Star City, it was very much like narrative essays. Like I was inspired by like Harper's, right? And it was like, oh, like, I've written for The Believer, I've
Yeah, I
written
love The
for
Believer, by the way.
major magazines. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
great. But like Star City Games paid me way more than they did, right? So it was like, oh, we get a platform to like holler at like a pretty big audience for like a good chunk of money every week to like riff on whatever and try to create meaning from experience. I think like I was always interested in the question of writing about games, um, from the perspective of like how to use that as a lens into broader social phenomena that are harder to like break apart without like a specific like tip of the spear into them. I had an article that came out for Star City one time shortly after Trump was elected the first time that was basically using kind of the act of like breaking into a standard environment as like an objective correlative of like figuring out the new political social world from here.
Mhm.
And also the experience of it, right? Like when I was 19 years old from Memphis, Tennessee, like I'd never traveled out of the country before. Having teammates from Croatia and Belgium and Japan was kind of this like mind expanding experience, and having to figure out how to like collaborate effectively. I'm a loud, effusive guy that like didn't really play so well with like, Shuhei, right? At first, right? Um, so I always liked the medium as a way of kind of saying like, okay, there's this like very specific piece of news, or there's very specific deck we want to talk about, or there's this means through which we arrived at how we wanted to prepare for this pro tour that kind of is like a legible way of jumping into like a much bigger topic, that doesn't require someone to be like, so anyway, I'm talking about the Iran war right now, which is not always, like what people are ready to kind of dive into the fray of. I guess the last thing I'll say is like how it's kind of changed since we started writing for Frank in the late 90s.
Mhm.
Like back then, I think, a big topic that people talked about, John Stewart talked about this, was that like people didn't care enough about politics, and like
Yeah.
people were like very political, and so like you would kind of start talking about like magic, or you'd start talking about whatever, like open up these sort of macro issues of like the economy or foreign policy or the Iraq war or like whatever it was, or even something individual of like, oh, making meaning from this activity with people. I wonder if these my friends right now are going to be my friends in 20 years. That's kind of remarkable if it is, right?
Mhm.
Now I think we are almost in the opposite problem where we're like oversaturated by stuff about like the climate or the foreign policy or the weather, the economy. And it's almost like the exact inverse where like now the ability to talk about something so micro as like a game or like an experience that you're creating with like 10 of your homies, is itself sort of a respite from
Oh,
what
yeah.
can feel like this deluge of forces beyond yourself, right? And I think both are exciting in different ways.
Yeah, that's actually what I've been working on in the background.
Really
So I
cool.
started out writing. I left my job in October, and basically, like the doctor shut me down. So I
Wait,
had like,
really?
yeah, I had like 3 months where I just had to improve my like baseline health, so that I had been working at an A16 and Netflix related startup, and we were doing
Nice.
really well. And I was the chief of studios. And
Cool.
we grew from like 5 or 6 to 200, and
Yeah.
after about 2 years, like, I ended up in the hospital. So I had to, like,
Yeah, that'll
try
drive
to
you crazy.
yeah, so I was like, "What am I gonna do?" And then I was like, "I've always wanted to write," and, I've had this, like, this thing on my list of to-dos to check out Substack for no obvious reason for a long time.
Nice.
And so I was like, "All right, I'm gonna just start writing on Substack." And I didn't use social media for the last 15 years, so I don't know what
Oh wow.
Twitter's like. I don't. I like, I used LinkedIn to find employees, things like that.
Yep.
Um, so it was all kind of new to me, and I was like, "Hey, what do I want to write about?"
Mm.
And I was like, I had a couple of magic stories, and it's just really nice to write stories about memories you have that bring people closer together. So I was like, cool, this is just fun. I have had all these ideas for stories for a long time. I'm just going to put it together. And so I wrote it 60 weeks or 75 now.
Oh
That
wow.
all exists on Substack. And then Alex Schwartzman came on. I was just like, wait, you can just record podcasts on here? I didn't know that. And so I'm just like a monkey pressing buttons. And I'm like, hey, Nate Heiss, you want to just see what this is like? And then I just start bringing on a whole bunch of people. And it's just been a lot of fun. It's kind of my favorite day of the week to talk to really smart people and talk about really like how do you take the lessons from a Magic the
Mm.
Gathering or other communities you've been in, and how do you build new ones? And so
Mm.
in the background of all of that, I've been building tool set that would allow me to make games in real time with other people and play them with other people and other experiences of that cut. And then you can publish them in different places. And so it's like, how do you make the content that a smaller group wants and like give them the tool set to do that in any form they want, whether it's in real life, whether it's
Mm.
online. And so that's been really neat. Like, can you give people better ownership over making their own respite better, right? That's really, like, speaking to where my head is too.
That's insanely cool. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that's especially important. Like like I feel like games have taken this like very interesting, like V-shaped trajectory, like particularly since like the mid 2010s, where
Yeah.
on the one hand we've like gotten better at like giga hacking attention than ever before, but on the other
Mhm.
hand, with some like AAA experiences, but also indie experiences, we've like really figured out how to like deepen your engagement with like consciousness, with intention, with choice, with narrative,
Oh yeah.
like more deeply than almost any other medium, right? And it's a really exciting. I've got Frank Lanz's The Beauty of Games up there.
Oh
It's one of my
yeah.
favorite mechanisms of figuring out how to like engage meaningfully with a game. But something that I've been interested in exploring, like a thing that's a bummer about like let's use like the archetypal mobile like attention hacking game and like the Giga Chad AAA, like okay, it's like profound, but it's like 120 hours of gameplay and like $1 zillion. Is like, can we move down into this corner where there's stuff that's like a lot lower intensity to produce, not just like a blueprints type stuff, but something a little bit more spontaneous,
Oh
something a
yeah.
little bit more emergent, but they can also possess some of the profundity of something like The Witness or whatever, where like the actual emergent phenomena that you notice are revealing in like ways that no other medium could like shine light on. And that kind of sounds like very much like the area that you're trying to play in. Is that, did I characterize that right?
Yeah, it ends up like one of the reasons I'm on Substack is to think about what I want the future of this type of platform to
Mm,
be, and then how do you build the tools to do it. And so next week, one of the more AI forward influencer or like online folks and I will
yeah,
just kind of like start seeing what we can do with the tools that we've been building,
cool.
and start playing games with the audience and trying to get an idea for what like people really would enjoy, that they can customize and make their own.
How familiar are you with like the immersive theater world by any
I'm pretty
chance?
familiar.
That's awesome.
I know Brandon Bozzi. He was like one of the
Yeah,
early calls. He's been doing a lot of interactive theater in Seattle. Um, and it's real life experiences feel like worth uh, a ton right now. It's interesting. Every clip I share about LARPs does much better than any clip I share about Magic the Gathering, and that's why we're only going to talk about LARPs from this point forward. No.
I was coming at the and two of my really good friends who I've known forever, and as it happens, were like some very early immersive theater pioneers,
Mhm.
including Michael Garver, who was the first director of Sleep No More, was one of the
Oh
folks involved
yeah.
with like Star Wars Galactic Battle Cruiser, and it was interesting. You had this like influx of folks who were like game designers coming into this like participatory theater angle, Jess Crean being one of them. And then you had a lot of like theater people that were coming into game design, realizing that they were kind of crescendoing at this exact where it's like, okay, we have like a deeply powerful experience we want to engender. We have like a very bounded number of audience members. We need to be able to mechanically engineer that like sort of in real time. And we want to do so reciprocally with like a set of players and a set of stewards rather than just broadcast like at the audience. And I think what people like very often said about like Sleep No More Then She Fell when they first started was, even though they knew intellectually, like not only did this experience run every day, but they literally cycled through the same experience like two or three times every performance. But it
Mhm.
felt like these like singular emergent totally unique moments because of the way that you could kind of direct attention across the experience and the way that things felt like they emerged organically, right? And to your point, when everything feels commoditized and commodified, having an experience that feels like utterly singular to you is one of the most valuable things that we can do, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like the game, right? It's essentially the game has come out of the movie and become a real life thing. And movies maybe shift to real life since movies are infrequently good at this point. So right. I mean, there are some good movies, but like compared to 20 years ago, holy cow, it's
Or,
like
yeah, yeah,
it's just not, there's not the one thing I didn't appreciate. And so that's been really interesting talking to like people like Scaff and really Mark Rosewater early folks. Like Wizards was a startup.
yeah,
When I joined it, I'm like still it's still a startup. It's sold, but it's still like Yahoo and
right.
um they're Wahoo's running the company, and they're still trying to figure a bunch of things out. We have to make 1,000 games for different IPs because we signed all these weird deals so that Scaff, Peter, and etc. could have more money. And I don't blame them. It was painful at the time, but also fun. But music and movies were also like peak businesses at these times that we kind of take it for granted. We're like, why aren't movies and music music in the 90s was like very awesome, and then
Totally.
movies in the 90s and the 2000s were also awesome. But those were boom times, and they're not anymore.
And these things behave in predictable ways, right? So like we have like I'm familiar with the 120-year history of basically advertising supported versus basically subscription supported media, and I'm sure it goes back even longer than that. That's just what I was studying at the media lab at MIT and other places. But like these things behave predictably with predictable patterns, right? So like
Mhm.
subscription based things we talked about, Substack, tend to reward like capturing like a niche audience, delivering like exactly the product they want, doing so consistently. Doing so, you can often afford not to have like as wide of a funnel as possible, as long as you have like a depth of experience that you deliver against. And then, conversely, advertising based models tend to need like a much broader fingerprint. You're almost always rewarded for retaining engagement in the act of consumption for like longer. And none of these things is like necessarily like good or bad, right? I'm not here to like throw shade at like I Love Lucy, but we just like sort of understand the conditions via which the average article is like a listicle versus which the average article is like the Fred Rogers deep dive in Esquire. And one of these things is conducive to one of these business models, and the other is not, right? And so I think that like when you look at the business models involved in like going and buying a CD, that's just very different than when like a very typical way of consuming music is like on YouTube interrupted 3 times by like 6 different ads, right? And yet like I mean I that's how I consume music, right? So I'm not like sitting there like rendering moral judgment over it, but I think that it's often like really sexy to be the person who's like making music or making a game or making a piece of art or writing an essay or whatever. And the business model innovation of the platform, while often very rewarding, is often not where extremely creative people want to go to like express their thesis about meaning in the world. And so you get to these eras where just like there can be 20-year periods where just like a given medium is like not especially set up for success,
Mhm.
right? And sometimes it's just hard, right? Like I have good friends that are executives at like indie movie studios, and like they're very smart people working very
It's
hard to
hard.
create really good things. It's just not easy to do, right?
Yeah, that we know well. I'm kind of curious, what game mimics how AI will proceed in like creative spheres over the next 10 years? Is it asteroids? Is it breakout? Like, what's the like game metaphor that explains what the hell is going to happen with like a large bubble of people who really are not interested, and then some people who are, right? How does that proceed moving forward? Tell me that. I don't know. I don't
That's a good
I don't know
question.
the answer, but I love throwing the question at you.
I kind of want to say like Roblox. And the
Okay.
reason is that I think you've got like a fundamental set of like very broadly applicable mechanics, like very broadly applicable mechanics, right? And you have like a very large number of users that are basically like engaging with the platform to kind of just like consume attention, right? But then
Mhm.
you have like some creators and some they're looking to accomplish like very bespoke, like specific, highly non-obvious use cases that like sometimes go deep and spike and have like a zillion people play and make a ton of money. Sometimes like are just kind of like niche, Eve Online esque sort of pseudo communities that get weird and have like a strange texture that tons of people play a lot and never really affect the broader environment.
Mhm.
And I think broadly speaking, like especially with like commercially available AI that we're like working with right now, like it's people have said like, is it a platform, is it a utility, is it a technology, is it a product? But I think like what we're seeing over and over again, even just this year in 2026, is how many uh, use cases and like environments and I mean not even just agent models, but I wrote a piece about this. I like to call the apparatus that
Mhm.
people build around themselves are just like really not predictable in advance until you start to like create a workflow around it, right? So I think something like Roblox, maybe something like Minecraft, where like really just you have like the bare bones of a game engine, but like the meat is in the emergent possibility. That would be
Okay.
what my baseline model is. I don't know. What have you said in response to that?
I don't know how it gets adopted in a way that it's really hard to know. I guess in the research that I've done on essentially 14 through 65.
Yep.
14 through 18 is much more likely to play with the chatbot or like AI tools or Suno
Yep.
or younger than anyone older. And so I do expect it to start with this younger generation outside of SaaS, and then everyone else will probably be somewhat alienated by it and have some friction and tension around it for the entire time it's there. It's funny. I don't know that it gets adopted by like Gen like millennial up, but I
Mm.
think it gets adopted from Gen Y down, and that ends up
I
being
think that
super
tracks.
weird. Yeah,
It,
that
it,
ends
it
up
does
being
end
really
up being
weird.
super weird. I mean,
Yeah.
like in our work right now, like this is a big priority of mine, right? Where it's like, I'm not like, it's funny because like AI skeptics call me an AI evangelist, and like techno optimists call me like an AI skeptic or whatever. I don't get, I'm very passionate about we as people, like the human condition is fraught with problems, but is fraught with like bounteous beauty, awe, and opportunity. And I
Mhm.
just think it's incumbent upon us to like use the tools we have available to us to solve the problems that we confront now and forevermore. And like that doesn't mean that literally every tool is useful in literally every scenario, but we need to have like an actual affirmative argument if a tool is available that can solve a problem for us about like why the risks outpace the rewards, right? And here in DC, but also very many places, there are just like long-standing known problems that AI is like very helpful for
Mhm.
helping us contend with, and yet there is just I'm not even going to say like affective polarization or resistance. Those are things too, but just like lack of concept grammatical familiarity for like how you would even begin to use something. It's sort of like many years back, I was in SF for like a conference, and I took a Waymo from wherever I was to the airport, and I
Mhm.
got home. I was talking to my dad, and I was like, "Yo, man, this is crazy. I took like a self-driving car to the airport. Like I just got off here. It's like this is the future. It's wild." And he's like, "Nah, man, that's like never gonna happen." He was like list off like infinite reasons why it's just like never gonna happen. And I'm like, homie, like I'm not saying like wouldn't it be cool if I'm like I just did this thing, right? And it was
You
just
got
like nah.
where's the video, and now you can't trust the video. Like you're too good with AI tools, right?
and that's kind of like what we see happening, right? Where there's like stuff that is not only possible, but is like commoditizably, trivially easy to tee up. Like you can do it over the course of the call, but a critical mass of people are just so not adjacent to like thinking of problems in that way that it's just very hard to convey what's actually possible, right?
Mhm.
And I do, to your point, think that creates like a step change in who can and will use this stuff, much less in what ways.
All right, I have a question for you that allows you to
Yeah,
dive into whatever context area you want, including magic and games. But
love it.
it's kind of like an interview question. I'm not interviewing you for anything other than for the fun of talking to you. But how do you make something great? What's required to make something great? That's because it comes up a lot. We have people from physical game world, we
Yeah,
have people from digital game world, and they have very different answers because they have known very different realities. How do you make
totally.
something great by Zach Hill?
So,
I want you
so
to
I
like
think this
read
applies
the
to
corpus. Yeah. No, just go
I
ahead.
think this applies to companies. I think this applies to screenplay. I think it applies to games. I think it applies to all art. I think like you've got to have an experience, a fundamental, essential experience that you go to sleep and wake up every day hoping you can convey to somebody else, and yet that you haven't been able to do that. You can't just
Mm,
sit and talk to them. You can't just explain expositorily to them. And in the context of entrepreneurship, you can't just like go buy a product that like does it, right? It's
Mhm.
like the BlackBerry is not the seamless integration of camera, phone, and email or whatever. And so I think you've got to be so filled with like righteous rage that this experience that is deeply profound to you remains foundationally inaccessible to the entirety of the rest of the world, such that your obsession is to instantiate it in a medium
Mhm.
that other people can thereby taste. Maybe they don't get the fullest rendition of, but they can get close enough to smell its scent, right? The writer David Foster Wallace has a phrase he likes to use that's throughout life we're alone in our tiny skull-sized kingdoms, alone at the center of all creation, right? And I don't actually think that that's nihilistic. I think what that is like an offering that like appreciates the scale of what it takes to transcend that,
Yeah,
right? To get outside of this and into this. And to do that, like whether you're trying to do that via creating, Nier Automata or The Witness or Magic or Gödel Escher Bach or like any of that, you've just got to be totally obsessed
I
with
agree.
how to paint with the mechanics at your disposal to
Mhm.
bridge the infinite distance between the sum total of all that you've experienced and the complete absence of any of that experience to every other being in the entire rest of the world, right? And I just think without that level of obsession, you can do stuff that's cool, you can do stuff that's good, you can do stuff that's valuable, you can eat at a nice restaurant, but it's not going to achieve a bar of greatness, and it's not going to be worth that level of obsession, right?
So I'm going to ask you another theoretical.
Please.
So one, it starts with how did anyone learn how to play Magic the Gathering at all?
Mm.
And then what are the steps that get us to where we are today, where people like are playing it more than ever and opening packs on the internet and dressing up in cosplay, which my daughter loved at a MagicCon. But like, what were the stages you think of like how it actually connected? Because it's insanely complicated, and how did we ever learn it in the first place?
So when I talk about niche, I'm curious how this lines up in your experience. I think
Mhm.
there's an underratedly unique thing that Magic brings to the table that very few other games do, which is that like you have this totally like instrumental, whether it's competitive, whether it's quote unquote casual, you've got all these game mechanics that you can use to like achieve objectives, and all of that's like good and all that's nice. But with the color pie, with the creative, with all these things, it's very critically one of the only games that loudly begs you to bring a dimension of personal expression into the way that you participate in the game,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think this is true. Like in chess, like you can see people's personalities in the way that they play and go. You can kind of famously do it in poker. You can do, but all of that's like masked, right? None of that is as straight as like I love to like get on the table as fast as possible and like build my army, blitz out of the gates before people are ready, and like end the game before other people even start, right? Or, oh, I love to assemble this contraption where 92 counterintuitive pieces that no one could ever see relate before come together into this like crucible that does something that you would have never imagined, right? And and not only is it the case that there are like numerous avenues for that kind of personal and creative expression, but also every one of them actually is a viable path to doing what the game asks you to do, right? And
Mhm.
because the game is so complex, right, which is one of the reasons that teaching people how to play is hard, you actually can't just kind of axiomatically derive like what you're supposed to do abstractly, or maybe Eric Lauer can, but most of us
Mhm.
mortals are not in that avenue, and so we it encourages us to actually lean in to what resonates the most with us and lean into what's tugging at our heartstrings. And there's very few avenues of life that I think that reliably reward following what captures us and taking that to its logical conclusion. I mean, I love one of the most beautiful things about Pro Tour history is that Brian Kibler, like smashed Pro Tours with Rith the Awakener and with Baneslayer Angel, right?
Yeah.
No one else was doing that. No one else was playing Baneslayer Angel and extended 4 copies. Um, so not only can you undertake that exploration, but it reliably pays off. And just very few other games. I love NBA Jam. I
Yeah.
love Hakeem Olajuwon, Robert Horry, but there's nowhere near that valence of
Yeah, I guess
values being
Minecraft,
expression.
Roblox, Fortnite, they end up being when you think about Substack, there aren't pieces to play with, right? There are ways to convey messages. I guess you have text and image and video, but that doesn't feel the same as like playing on a board with blocks or cards, right?
Exactly, and Minecraft's a perfect example of does great too, where it's basically like here's a canvas, build your universe, right? There's just only a finite number of ways in which that's possible. I mean,
Mhm.
and I do think Substack and social media are a bit distinct. I mean, I think that like you can zoom out enough to view, Twitter or TikTok or whatever as like, oh, these are mechanics and the optimization vectors or the engagement variable. And you can do that, but the difference is that the
Yeah,
mechanics are just so much less explicit, right?
it's
Even when you
thinner.
get them, they're thinner. Yeah, exactly. And so I do think that one of the things that games are great at is kind of giving you they make it easy to dip your toe into the pool, right? And if the water's warm, they invite you to swim.
Should education be more gaming forward? One thing I've always wondered about is with Magic, you're learning from someone else, and it allows you to learn something very complex much more quickly and to learn things about how humans work and how math works and how the universe works much more quickly. Like, one, should there be like a free version of Magic for schools that allow people to learn the game much more quickly? Would that be good or bad? But there's another question of like, does the PvP aspect for those who want it essentially allow people to like self-select into a cohort that's going to generate compounding value for each other?
So, like with the fundamental difference, I think, with something like Magic, and education writ large, and this is true, I think, of games more broadly, is that like the objective function of Magic is like very explicit, right? Like
Mhm.
you get your opponent from 20 to 0, you run them out of cards, right? Or in Commander, you get them from 40 to 0, you run them out of cards, right? Maybe you can do maybe you cast Battle of Blitz. There's other stuff you can do. But the objective function of education is like very illegible, right? And one way, and then we've done work like this. Like you get 20 people in a room and you ask them what the purpose of education is. You don't get like 20 answers, but you do get like 15 answers, right?
Mhm.
My good friend Erin Robb, who went to the Graduate School of Education at Stanford, did her thesis on the history of the purpose of education, right? And I don't remember the content of the thesis, but it was basically like, even if all you do is look at like the influential thrusts of American education, there's like 6 or something like animating imperatives, right? It's like good citizenship and character,
Mhm.
liberal participation in society, career advancement, the cynical take of like the docile production of workers or whatever it is. And I'm probably mischaracterizing her specific work, but the point is, very high leverage people who have been very influential have had very orthogonal visions of like what education is for. And so I think like it's much, 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 much harder than it is in a game environment to like define your objective function, much
Mhm.
less explicate the mechanics that you need to like path forward towards it. So that doesn't mean that there's not a role for games in education. I think there's like a lot of roles for games in education, but I
Mhm.
think a lot what you need to be doing with games and with those is like operating within a scenario where you've already like my objective function is like helping kids learn how to divide, right? Or helping people learn how to spell, or like in the case of something like Duolingo, which you can criticize, but like for the sake of example, learning a language is like way more legible than like become a multifaceted citizen of like a participatory democracy,
Mhm.
right? And again, like comparing to the counterfactual of like a given teacher who has 95 million things to do and has to be a master of like numerous different unrelated disciplines, such as real-time facilitation, knowledge assessment, evaluation design, like all these things that are very hard, none of which are correlated with each other. I think it can be a service to say, oh, we've done like the game design job of like constructing a bunch of problems along an interest curve that can target to like performance attributive variables of like given people. I think that that's pretty promising, but I think
Mhm.
that's like a very tailored use case. You may have met like Katie Salen and the team that was doing like Quest to Learn in New York in the late 2000s, early 2010s, where they basically tried to make like the entire experience of school one big sort of participatory gaming endeavor. And I
Mhm.
actually think it was like very successful for a number of different reasons, but it was just insanely hard
Yeah,
and
for
like
sure.
very performance based and very small scale. Like I just don't really think that like gaming is going to be the omni solution for the multi-vector challenge of education at a national scale.
Yeah, I don't know that I would expect it to be. I think it ends up being interesting where Magic brings a bunch of really smart people who didn't have an outlet for the types of brains they had. It shows up, and all of a sudden they have a community that allows them to flourish. That doesn't include everybody. It's not like, in China, like everyone doesn't do everything. There are specialists for sure. And
Right.
so there's some question of like, is this an American thing? Do other countries have a better sense of like how to approach these problems? And are there brains that allow you to um, tailor your methods to them, right? To get the best out of the group. And like, how does that surface through educational institutions?
I think it's
Also,
right. I mean,
Zach and I are
yeah.
game designers, just so you know. No, no, he has a real job. He's like a professional, serious person who helps people. I am not.
While also being a game designer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what did you do in Magic? You came after me. Your
I,
whole.
I came
Tell
I
me
came very
everything.
shortly after you. So
Hmm.
I came in. The first set I worked on was Rise of the Eldrazi. The last set I worked on was Cons of Tarkir, various consulting and whatever subsequent to that. But yeah, it was. I think like what was that, like 2 or 3 years after you had pieced out? It was very close to you.
Yeah, 2006 or so. Yeah.
2006, yeah. So I was 2009. So like I worked very closely with Matt Place, who I know was on teams with you.
Oh yeah.
The big, I mean, it was a great time to work there because there was this inflection point where like sales were broadly speaking going down. People didn't know what to do about a lot of the sets and about organized play, and like y'all had just come up with, or the team sort of had just come up with like New World Order, which is about like the complexity of limited environments, but broadly speaking about like just the complexity of the game and the visceral appeal of the game, which I think dovetailed nicely with what I was like mostly passionate about, which was I just think it's really important for the things that are cool and the things that are viable in a game to be broadly speaking the same things,
Hmm.
right? I think something that like
Yeah, I
y'all did
agree.
an amazing job. Yeah, and that's like not right where it's like a lot of the time the best thing to do is like cast forbid and discard Krovikan horrors and like care about which are stacked on top of the graveyard in the right way, and that is often like better than like casting Sarah Angel, right? um but I think like viewing the chat, like many people said, oh, the way the game's fundamentally wired, removal costs 2 mana, cool big creatures cost 6 mana, two is less than six, and there just isn't any way to reconcile these things. And everybody that we were working with, very much led by Aaron Forsyth, I think was very committed to figuring out different ways that which this could work. And the first standard environment that I was on the playtesting team along with people like Tom Lopelli, Eric Lauer, we talked about,
Hmm.
many other people were like accountable for, was like the standard environment where like Jund was the best deck. And it was like very annoying in some ways, but it was the first time ever that just like a dinky mid-range, there were literal 3/3 creatures for three, 4/4 creatures for four in green without mana acceleration. It was the first time that anything like that had like ever been viable, right?
Hmm.
And I think that felt very validating, right? The arc of what we were doing, I think, the New World Order thing happened, and then we're like, okay, how do we reliably make deeply rewarding limited environments? And so, we were working on Innistrad, we worked on Khans of Tarkir, I think two very well regarded limited environments. We
Hmm.
the Return to Ravnica that we were also working on. And that was where we started to get these like playbooks of like, oh, you need to like seed 10 archetypes. You need to have like signpost card. You need to have like one-off build arounds that do or do not come up, but can like rotate around the draft to people that are able to get them.
Hmm.
I had designed Magic 2013, and my kind of animating hunger was, I just think you can make a very simple core set with limited gameplay that's every bit as rich as any other set, because of what Mark Rosewater liked to call lenticular design. But basically, you can hide the complexity behind various tiers of engagement,
Hmm.
so that where a player is at is kind of the level of the metagame that they're operating on. So I think it was very fun for us to figure out a lot of these like core kind of elemental technologies at this inflection point. I think like particularly with regard to limited, they've blown past us by light years and figured out how to jam out like really good limited environments. With regard to constructed, I think we really did something very special. I think it's been a long time since a standard environment has had that, like, if you look at like Melissa DeTora's Thragtusk deck or whatever, you have people casting 1 mana cards, you have people casting 7 mana cards. Like, no one's cheating anything. You're just casting spells that are
Hmm.
like intrinsically cool. The best cards in the format are like Wolfir Silverheart and Restoration Angel and Thunderball Hellkites. And like, I think it was a very special standard environment. We really kind of achieved that objective and really haven't done anything like that since then.
Hmm.
It was a very deeply rewarding time to be part of the game. And obviously, we, I think, turned it around from losing X amount of money a year to making lots of money a year. And now they make, I don't know, literally $1.5 billion a year, I think.
Yeah,
So
they're up
that's
there.
crazy. I mean, we weren't anything like that. So it's amazing to see how much, not only bigger but more of like a cultural force it is. Uh, but we played our part, and I think we're, talking back to whenever I reconnect with those guys, I think we're very proud of the work that we did.
Yeah, I talked to Tom and Matt, obviously. I think,
Oh, sick.
yeah, they're both, I think everyone feels pretty good about the journey Magic's taken. And there aren't a ton of windows where, there were a couple where I was like, oh, I didn't know that, some of the sets I really don't like. I didn't know that. I accidentally mentioned it with Mike Elliott. I was like, man,
Oh,
I hope you didn't
hilarious.
work on Mercadian Mask. He's like, I was the lead for Mercadian Mask. I was like, well, I can't unhate it, so we're going to let it play. But
Mike in
uh,
general had some very ambitious design endeavors that he tried to make work.
yeah, some of them are, I have remembered fondly. I think Urza Saga is a hoot. But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I was kind of curious. One thing that was playing through my head as you were navigating your history was how
Yeah,
complicated the game seems now, but how normalized that seems. And the reason I bring it up is because I think without really paying close attention, we've boiled a frog to make the population much
yeah,
more capable of handling the complexity. And that actually is true in a number of places where we kind of speak to how like humanity like has declined, and it's like not true largely. It's
yeah.
shifted how it learns together. Certainly the power dynamics make it weird at like a grander scale, but at an everyday scale, man, like how do you think about that? Like the fact that people
So
can do such incredible things really quickly now.
I love you're connecting the like game phenomenon to like the macro societal phenomenon, and it reminds me of like playing like multi-axial twitchy shooters in Japan in like 2006, where it felt like, okay, whatever kind of of consciousness can manage this game feels like a fundamentally distinct kind of consciousness than like mine. And then it's like, oh wait, I don't mean that in a dehumanizing way. I just think that shows, the adaptability of the human mind, the human condition. That said, I do think like vis-a-vis Magic, just a few mechanical things kind of are in its advantage now. So like, you started working there what, 2001? Was it
2000,
earlier?
yeah.
2000. And I started working there in 2009. And that means like in 2001, like the game had been around for 8 years. The modal player was, whatever the data was back then, it was like 4 years or whatever it was. When I was there, you had, broadly speaking, similar timelines. Like the median player had been playing for like 8 years at that point. You had people that had lapsed and come back and like whatever. But the point is that as like time elapses, you don't see this like consistent like 4 year window of people like going through and then just like dropping out again. You see over and over again that like of the percentages of active players that are active for a given point in time, more and more and more of them have been playing for longer and longer and longer
Nobody
amounts
ever
of time.
dies. It's kind of like a utopia in that way, right?
Well,
Utopian
yeah, that
capitalist product. Yeah.
now that we're all getting up and older, that trend will start to swash off. But then it's been around long enough that like parents teach kids, or there's like long-standing communities of game stores that can teach people. So I think, and I've talked with Aaron Forsyth about this, and I was convinced by his explanation, which is basically like the median player's complexity for just is much higher because they have much more exposure to the history of Magic and the arc of Magic, and much more connection to other Magic players, especially because of Commander, that can just kind of like yo-yo walk them through the process.
Hmm.
And then simultaneously, there's another dimension of it, which is like that also means that more people have kind of like seen the movie before. And so it takes like a little bit more juice to like get people excited. Like back in the day, we could be like, oh, 5/5 flying first strike lifelink protection from demons and dragons. That's like, holy shit. Like, how do we do it? Now it's, that's just not going to impress anybody in the same way. So
Yeah.
you, even
Unplayable.
in, yeah, totally unplayable, right? And even if you ignore like the power creep dimension of it, which I think is a big deal, you still have this scenario where like people are just not going to be impressed with a card unless you have words like, oh, each time an ability triggers, it triggers an additional time for each treasure that you sacrifice, or whatever, right? Like you kind of need to be doing more to capture kind of the same amount of interest. And that I think also compounds with the fact that like I think 7 sets a year is the norm now or whatever. So all of which is to say, I think a lot of the heavy lifting of the complexity threshold is done by the extent the length of time that the median player has been in the funnel.
Mhm.
And then I think that creates like a very large population of players that can get people over the friction points where in previous eras they'd have been like, dude, I don't understand this. This is weird.
Yeah, again, it speaks to like, hey, how do you think about the population at large? And like, it's not, it's not intentional. It's not like Wizards is like going out and training these people to have interest.
Not at
It's not
all.
similar
Yeah.
to like Wikipedia or any community that's supporting itself. There's some question of like, what are the components that make that community worth standing up for? And that's one where it's interesting with Magic because
Mm.
people just picked it up and uh, it happens, but I don't entirely know like what makes the spark go.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I do think it's different from different players, right? And
Hmm.
I do think that Commander normatively is like a sea change in how Magic works. I was talking with Sam Black about this, and I was talking with Brian Kibler about this, and they like I never really understood Commander, right? But I want to. I think it's very important. I think it's awesome. I love the fact that it exists. And
Hmm.
basically, like the net of what they were saying is like there's a difference between kind of like having television on in the background and like sitting and watching a movie. And like for me, I hate when television's on in the background, right? Like
Yeah, me too.
I can only do one thing I can only focus on one thing. I want to be focusing on it with
Silence.
like 100% of my attention.
Yeah.
Love silence.
It's the best
Can't get
sound.
enough
Yeah.
silence. So
Mhm.
it's the best sound. You should write a song about that, Paul Simon. But with Commander, it actually creates a mode of engaging with Magic where you don't have to be like that locked in, right? Like most of the time, other people are doing stuff. You don't really need to be paying attention to every one of the variables. And you, when it's kind of your turn, can like come and do a few things, but you can focus on things that like really matter, like socializing with your friends, connecting with the people around you, celebrating the fact that your group has met up and continues to meet up for the last 15 years, right? And so I think that that creates almost I'm not going to say like parasocial, that's not like the right word, but it's basically like a it's like an adjacent way of engaging with the game where the game is kind of like the main character of the experience and everybody's dancing around the experience, but it's you're not gonna it doesn't lose you if there's a moment where your attention wanes, right?
Mhm.
Whereas like in a Magic Duel, you know, like if you blunder, like that's it, right?
You
um
feel it forever. Yeah. It's part of your, like, you have a tome full of failures. Write it down. Yeah.
that's as all of us that have thrown matches in decisive pro tour contexts know, sometimes you wake up 25 years later screaming over something you could have done differently, hypothetically.
Yeah, your significant other does not appreciate that at any time in the 25 years. What would you do with Lord Magic? You can do anything
What would
with
I
it.
do with
You are the
Lord
god
Magic?
of goddess of magic, whatever you want. I don't care.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
yeah,
Nowadays,
you get to say, no, you. What do you do with magic as the person who is in charge of it all? You are the head of every decision related to the game for the next epoch of its
I think
existence.
I would make a really dope Chandelar like experience that
I
is
want that
also
so
like the
bad. Yeah.
container for all digital magic. Um, I think like by any stretch of the imagination, like Magic has hit so many ceilings that I think like everybody's got their like personal burr in their bonnet of like why are there pizza shaped basic lands, you know, or whatever. But I just don't think it's like very credible
They're
to like
delicious.
they're yummy, right? People like them. We're sitting there talking about them right here.
Mhm.
So you know, I don't have a lot of credibility of anybody's, including mine, like bone to pick with how a given thing has gone. I do something that's been think something that's been consistently true when I was working on Duels of the Planeswalkers, when we were working on Magic Online, now that we're working with MTG Arena. I think we've gotten like steadily better digital experiences, but I don't think we've had a digital experience that like fully captures like the magic of what like Magic can uniquely engender that like other games can't. I think
Mhm.
one of the reasons Chandelar is cool is because of that thing we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is like the ability to render an experience or a creative endeavor concrete in the form of like game mechanics and cards and everything else. But I also think what's cool is that it can get back in a way that's very hard in like an internet age to the experience of actually deck building, right? Where like each new resource, and like we see this in things like Slay the Spire that are very successful, where
Mhm.
like when you deploy cards to people and actually say, like, hey, you have this challenge, you need to figure out deck building wise how to surmount this particular challenge, like you get that spark of like creativity, uncertainty, reward, discovery, payoff, that Magic as a game engine is like robust enough to deliver. And then I think that also like places you in an environment where then if what you want to do is build like an MTG arena experience like on top of that, as a game designer, you know, like now you have all of these like metagame tier means of like monetizing and of blinging things out and of interfacing with like the game world and the play world that I think give you not only a much more sustainable and a much more profitable, but a much more interesting array of things to like monetize that are not just like gems. And so I think that that gives you like a deeply profoundly rewarding play experience as a player. It gives you a way of remaining engaged even if like a given set is like not for you. And I think that as designers of like the economic engine, it just gives you like 10 to 100x the amount of avenues to explore of how to let players premiumize their game experience. So that's probably the horse I'd ride.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in how you perceive Chris Cox's comments about digital being the future or the focus of Hasbro versus it's just kind of like, what does it mean to you? Because I could see it being this, oh, we can't protect physical or oh, we can't grow it beyond where it's at. Like, how do you perceive that? That's an interesting one, right?
I mean, I would say that I think like saying it is the future is like psychotic, and
Mhm.
and like I say that because we've had this conversation
Oh, many
innumerable
times.
times, right? So yeah, I mean, you remember it with early Magic Online, where it was like, why are we printing cards? That's so old. Clearly, digital is the way that games go, and then that was just like patently false because people like to interact in the real world. Also, printing Magic cards, I don't think now, but I think for literally there was a time period that was actually more profitable than printing money. Like
Mhm.
it's a good business model to be involved in. And then we had like the pandemic where it was like, oh, there's no such thing as real. And like, yeah, digital did well, but also real life did like super well. And then like Secret
Mhm.
Lair come out and we could prioritize, premiumize like individual buys for just a mammoth amount of money. And now like why do I like? I mean, I was just in Croatia with an old Magic teammate of mine from 20 years ago. In August, I'm going to Seattle with like friends of mine from the Seattle Magic 15 years ago.
Mhm.
People like the game because it's a talisman that unifies eras of their experience and people that they've had them with that is able to transverse through time and space in a way that like very few other things can, right? Like certainly not video games, right? I mean, and I play Magic with good friends of mine still or whatever. But the point is, people like to play the game in a large part, like in their homes,
Mhm.
in third spaces, with people that this is the thing they do. And it would be one thing, like I could see someone being like, well, that's like all very nice and sentimental, but like you're a dinosaur and it's old. But that core experience makes just bukus of money, right? This isn't like some naive world where like I'm talking about like oxhide bound book covers that you're selling for $20 once a year. I mean, people are bringing commander decks that they've spent $2,500 on, so this game is, I mean, it quite literally is the intersection of like collectibles and game experience and like long-term investment in both product and community. So
Mhm.
I just think it's you lose all of that if you have to intermediate it all through a given device. And the second that the game stops being supported, like, are you going to really lose that community? I think those communities really matter to people. I mean, you were just at Magic Con.
That's
So
huge.
I
So,
don't think, yeah, it's enormous. So I don't think ever digital is going to be the North Star. But I do think digital can reinforce. I mean, we saw this with Duels of the Planeswalkers very much. I think it can solve problems that the solo analog experience can't solve by themselves in a way that reinforces the entire ecosystem.
yeah, it'll be an interesting window. I know many different entities are, you have Riftbound and Lorcana and other successful games that have entered, but like there will be more, and some with really deep pockets. I don't know if you think about it that much, but I'm kind of curious what you think the future of tabletop is in like 5 years, right? What does that look like?
Yeah,
And
yeah. So I'm less familiar with a lot of the. I mean, I know like Guskin and all these like they're cool folks making these games are like very talented. I think that there's things that are different now that weren't different before that actually are some of the reasons those games are more successful.
Mhm.
I think like in particular, I think like the very phenomenon that we were talking about there being like the median Magic player being umpteen years old, and so the median Magic card having to satisfies for that. I think that makes a lot of the organized play environments, particularly standard, and I've got a lot of opinions about standard. I have a thing called a standard cube that I made like to make this assertion, but I think that like a lot of the Magic organized play formats right now are just like which cards are incidentally legal in like which formats, and that's like not coherent as like a concept grammar, right?
Hmm.
And it also means that game designing and engineering a lot of that, like your balance between good gameplay and appeal is just like a lot more multifaceted and hard than, oh, I get to come up with a totally new game engineered for like a bespoke gameplay experience. I don't have the baggage of eons of history, and I can construct that gameplay experience, in accord with like a manageable number of like good game design principles. So I think that's one dimension. I think a second dimension is, organized play, for example, like as Magic has pivoted into Commander, and as we've learned a lot of the lessons of like, oh, the overly competitive pro tour and prize structures, whatever, often like don't generate engagement. And like, here's things that you can do with stores that people like, but here's things that people don't really like. And here's what you can do with like non-store third spaces or whatever. I think the possibilities for varieties of organized play, some competitive, some not competitive, some large scale, some medium scale. I just don't think that's a solved possibility space. And I also don't think that Magic or any other game has been designed from the ground up to accommodate its organized play architecture. I think that's like a fruitful, bountiful field of game design.
Yeah.
Then you have like what Brian David Marshall is doing right now, where it's like the economic dimension of that, where like, oh, the core economic unit of a pack is itself like a gameplay experience, right? And like we haven't really intersected the economic dimension with organized play dimension, right? So like sometimes we do with like sealed deck and draft, but those are very basic, right? You can imagine like a fully engineered ground up gameplay progression that is also like monetized, right? So I think that for all of those reasons, what I think is the reason that we're seeing things succeed now when they haven't succeeded in the past is, I think, in many ways, the primacy of Commander with the sort of inertia of the whole of Magic's game system just kind of reaching a critical mass. But I think what that's also, and I mean, the other new games are like pretty good and they have good IPs too, but other games have been in the past good and have good IPs too. So I don't give a lot of stake in that. But I think what that's enabled are like fundamentally new ways of re-envisioning organized play,
Hmm.
and I think that's exciting. Like may the best brand win. You know,
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool too. I think well, I'm kind of curious what magic card personifies Zac Hill? What
I
is
mean, I've
Zac
got
Hill
to. I've
in a
got to
magic
say,
card?
Chatter of the Squirrel. That was my old comment for a while, but I'm bushy tailed. I'm bright eyed. I like to yap. I like to gain card advantage. So I'll go with my old standby Chatter of the Squirrel. I'll say my favorite card that I ever designed is Thunderball Hellkite, and I think that that personifies everything that I value about Magic, which is like an intrinsically appealing card that is a tournament playable card that is doing like a top down resonant thing, like there's a thunderclap that fucks people up, right?
Hmm.
And it's just very clean in the way that you understand, and like you can min max it hard to like metagame against Lingering Souls, or you can just cast it and beat people's ass. So for all those reasons, I think Thunderball Hellkite is like my embodiment of what a Magic card should be. But I personally will always and forevermore be a Chatter of the Squirrel.
Okay. I like
Can I
chattering
get
as
your
well.
take on the future of games? Because I think you're probably more familiar with the game
Hmm.
engines of like Riftbound and Lorcana than I am.
I'm not.
Oh
I
yeah. Oh
am,
okay.
but
Well,
I am
never
pretty.
mind.
I'm closer to like the world of AI and games and entertainment, just
Mm,
because that's where I was before I started on
right.
Substack. So I think that's where it's like, will people want to adopt this that are a certain point? I'm not sure that's true. Um, I think that yeah, it was interesting. You and I had a conversation where it was like, will everyone just be making content that's three 3 seconds and nothing will be substantial enough for anyone to take anything away from it? Or will you see some deeper experiences than we can make before emerge that are better than what we could do before? My guess is you'll see both. We actually had built. the emergent kind of gameplay stuff that you hearkened to earlier, where you can
Yeah.
have. I was at Wizards, and we were kind of talking about a project where you can have an RPG where you have those elements, and
Sick.
it works. It's definitely doable. Does the market want it? That I can't tell you, right? And that's so it's a really interesting time where a lot of things. I like the idea of a grassroots effort starting where people are building it together for each other, and it's not so
Mhm.
mercenary and just like easy to distrust. Um, yeah, I think it's you'll see a lot of people go at Roblox in different ways, and that's likely to be where it goes in terms of physical. Um, I think you'll see collection become even more
Mm,
prominent in how it goes. You
makes
see
sense.
that with Wonders of the First and the Bo Jackson game, but you also will see it from Fanatics probably. There's no way they don't
Yeah.
dive deep into that in a way
Yeah.
that others can't. So it's like social media will be full of people opening packs to get rare things, and it'll be a slot machine everywhere, and we'll have to wonder what we're doing.
I do think that's a really good point that I didn't bring up before, but you're right, is like absolutely operative to this, which is like independent of organized play, just like the content creation ecosystem of like
Yeah, it's
unboxing and
built for it.
opening collective. It's just absolutely enormous, right? Um, and
You
people
can't
like
lose.
that.
You could just buy a pack, open it, and you get something valuable, and you get like people enjoying it. That's like a lot of things going for you. Magic definitely benefits from that. Um,
And
all
I
of these
and I
games do.
don't think it's and I don't think it's accidental that Magic has increasingly premiumized
It's not.
its
Yeah,
offerings, precisely along that axis, right?
yeah. It's weird. There was this bridge that I didn't cross, where like you see card games and crypto getting together, but like they clearly
Yep.
have like the game, the Bo Jackson game, and the Wonders of the First game feel like crypto games without crypto. Um,
Right.
It makes me wonder a lot about the future of proxies and how ubiquitous they may become.
Totally.
You can't afford to play those games right now unless you're a billionaire. So like it's natural that like that ecosystem has to like come to support all these other ecosystems. So I expect increasingly I see like this future where maybe you have a game system that anyone could design to. That's something I'm interested in.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's where I kind of want to see the world where any of us can make the cards within it, assuming like the structure's there, and your commander deck can be literally yours. And we all know the like general rules of the universe, and you can bend them to the rule books want.
Right.
Yeah,
You could do it like a NBA 2K like character season creator where like you allocate X amount of mechanics and that takes out of your macro pool of points. So you're not just Wembying all the time. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, I
And,
like
and that
Wemby
could be,
on
yeah.
Substack. I haven't used it yet, but like whenever I block someone, I want to post Wemby and just feel like he's got my back. He's like 7'5". Whenever a male with 20 followers who's got like there's this like bunch of people using AI clearly like
Oh
with like a
God.
Twittery bent, like there's you know what I mean, that are just like, let's generate accounts and start trying to grow and be goony. And you're like, I just want Victor to protect me from
Eh.
all of that.
Yeah, dude, I'm probably gonna be like substacking like way more over the next like 6 months, and probably beyond that. I think I've reached my phase of my career where I want to start talking about
Yeah.
how we did a bunch of this stuff. And I mean, you're doing literally the same thing, but it's very funny to me when I think back, like in politics, right? Like the death threats everywhere, shit posters everywhere, and I feel like Magic was like the crash course for like learning how to deal with that,
Hmm.
right? Like, oh man, print Cavern of Souls, 80 people try to kill me, dude tries to kidnap me in a van, like offering some political take that pisses someone off is just like child's play. Like,
Yeah, like when did you invent standard? I don't think so. That really made yeah, Scaff has like a clip about death threats that they made to wizards.
oh,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah, if
So,
you've never made products for an audience that hates you, like you're not even
what
trying.
and I always tried to steel man this, right? Because like I think it's really bad for a creator when you get in a position of like resenting your fans. I think that that's like a very toxic place. And I do, when you think it's like, okay, like people have appreciable portions of their net worth in this like game that we've made, and they've had
Mm.
some of the most formative experiences of their lives getting deeply invested and participating in, right? And so when we as like egotistical dickhead, designers with absolute godlike power over everything say like, actually, I think like Manaleek is too good, or like actually you're gonna have to learn how to cast, you know, voracious hydras right now, not remands, like that really does confound people's sense of reality, right? And if we do some of that in a way where it's like, oh, actually, now we're going to ban a bunch of cards that you have that are worth $100 and now they're worth nothing, and your, let's say wife got you that as a birthday present for the year, like that. I get why these things can be as animated as they are.
Yeah, I posted a
And I
clip
try to
about
empathize with that.
I posted a clip with Tinsman, and Tinsman was like, my Ravnica box that I got from the store at Wizards with my $1,300 a year stipend went
Yep.
from $1,800 to $1,100, and it was because they reprinted it, which is incorrect. It's not because of reprints. It's just it's not valuable.
Right.
But like the whole internet wanted to cancel him without context for any of it, right? And I had to delete it because they were like, "You're a collector. You don't care about the game at all." And so those people should just buy proxies. Like, come on, just buy proxies and get on with your life.
Also, I love the
I did.
you, comma Brian Tinsman, comma don't care about the game. That's solid gold.
Yeah, I enjoyed his chat quite a bit. It's fun seeing him. Like I've heard his game is quite good and unique,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's a similar conversation to Brian where they have this thesis after making and playing games for 30 years that's like
Mm.
very well informed. Like it's nice to see them both doing well with. What would your game be if you were like, I'm going back, like forget the world and making it a better place. Let's just have fun, the perfect fun. What would you make?
I designed along with a friend of mine this card game for Esther Perel, the relationship therapist, called Where
Yeah,
Should We
she's
Begin?
on Substack. Yeah, I see
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
name.
She's great. She's great. Yeah, the point of that game was to basically like enable like reactivations of relationships and kind of take them in new ways or whatever. And it's been pretty popular. People have liked it, and I dig that. I think I'd be interested in doing a version of that game for first dates. I'm very weirdly passionate about like the like quote unquote loneliness crisis. I think like
Oh yeah. How is it
yeah,
possible? Look what we're doing right now. Like anyone can do this. It's not.
and
Yeah.
yet I think the activation energy is quite high, right? And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that like a lot of the questions, especially like as people get cynical about like quote unquote the apps or whatever, is like, okay, what do you even do? And I think there's a lot of like parallels in game design of like the Esther game is like very deep for people who've known each other a while. So like this would be like the magic tutorial experience of like,
Hmm.
okay, like how do you drop in like safely but interestingly? I mean, I do think that like in the pandemic, people talk about whatever the driver is or whatever, but it is sort of startling as like remote work becomes more normative, as there's more entertainment than ever on the internet and on TV. Like, I do think we fail to appreciate just how much like low level, basic like adjacency that we have to one another, like just environmental interaction where you learn to have like a bullshit conversation that's like sort of annoying, but that like teaches you how to like be an adult in context with other people. I have empathy for the fact that like that's non-obvious, right? So I
Oh
think
yeah.
I'd like to work on something that lubricates that process in sort of a safe, fun, engageable way.
I like that a lot. I think that could be applicable in a bunch of directions too. Um, Someone would just mention they wish they had made a game to make dating easier, and like for sure that's doable. Like that seems like a different flavor of what you're describing in a way,
Totally.
right? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And you could do a version of it that's like the company retreat version. You could do a version of it that's like, the church group meets on Wednesday night the first time. But I mean, yeah, just like non-obvious ways of forming connections amongst people that are gonna hopefully be in each other's lives for a while, but don't know how to get started, right?
Yeah, that's interesting to me. Like, if in a different session, I would be. We could just make it.
Yeah,
No,
I was gonna
meaning
say
like
we could just
I
like
have the
create
tool
these
open
things.
on my computer right now.
Oh,
we could
sick.
like literally just be like, all right, let's start playing it together,
Let's
and
jam.
but we can talk about that offline. I think you could do
I
it.
would love to follow up with you about that. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, there's something about you that I don't know about. So I'm not from social media land, and I know you have like real world life. But I'm on Substack and I have my
Hmm.
own identity. But whenever you read something and then share out comments on it, it's someone who's bigger that like I should probably know that I don't. Who should I know? Because every time I'm like, oh, he's probably right that this long piece is something I should read. I guess I'll follow this person. And so there's always this like Zach is dragging me into the light feeling whenever you read something. Who am I supposed to read? And like, who are these people? I don't know who they are. Who
Oh
is
man,
Esther Perel? Yeah.
I think like something that's great about being in DC and in policy and social impact world is like half people's job is to just like read long form articles and like
Yeah. Yeah.
write
Yeah.
about them. Um, People that I love deeply, who I think are very perceptive, and I'm not going to name people that are already kind of have big audiences. My good friend Marlene Laruelle is based in Italy. She's probably the leading scholar of illiberalism as a force,
Oh, nice.
but and not like in a meme take way. I think she's very fair to illiberalisms of the left and of the right and of those that are hard to categorize. And I
Mhm.
think she also, even more importantly, like gets at the question of like why is that appealing at this moment in time, right? And like why would we default to a setting where like 20th century liberalism is like even good? Like is it? Maybe it's not, right? And to the
It's a
extent that
good
it
question.
is,
Yeah.
right. And to the extent that it is, people need to make that case. And they need to make the moral case. They need to make the operational case. And they need to make the case in context, right? But in the US and in Europe and in Asia and in abroad, right? She started a Substack around the same time I started mine about 2 months ago. And it's just spectacular. And the writing is engaging. The thought is good. And it's not so long that it's tedious to crawl through. So I would strongly recommend Marlene. Um, Jen Paulka is the writer of Eating Policy. She
Oh,
is kind
yeah.
of the evangel of state capacity. She's also a good friend. And why I think that matters is that most of the political and policy conversation that we have is all about like, should we enact this law? Should we enact this policy? Because we think that's good and it's going to happen. But all of that is actually fake news in the sense that many of the big policy debates that we're having as a country just will never happen in practice because we can't execute them. Right. And I'm not even saying, oh, the law won't get passed. I'm saying, even if we pass the law, we passed a big infrastructure bill that said, oh, we need to build a bunch of electric car charging stations. And that never happens. You don't have the state capacity to do it. Right.
Hmm.
And so, like, what you really don't want to do is expend all of your political capital on some sort of law or policy that you have to spend
Hollow
down like
victories.
you've used
Yeah.
all your chips. Yeah, and then they just never take place, right? And so it's really hard to understand exactly how that works. And I think Jen is one of the foremost experts in the country on how to think about that and what we can do about it. So the two of them are remarkable and awesome. I guess I will. Let's see. There's a lot of places I could go.
They're
I'll
all
plug.
new to me. Like you have no idea how like oblivious I am. I'm like, oh, this person with the 100,000 subscribe. I'm like, I have never heard of you. This
Oh,
is
sick.
I come after me, Freddie, whoever you are.
That's spectacular. Well, Freddie's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, my favorite contrarian communist. I really love what Jerusalem Demsis is doing at the argument,
Mm.
creating a great stable of writers who are kind of like squarely grounded in the liberal tradition. My friend Dean Ball writes Hyperdimensional. He actually just today announced that he was going into OpenAI. He's a brilliant comes from the right, but an AI policy analyst and kind of a societal predictor of the adjacent future. And I'll give it a special plug to my homie Santi Ruiz and his newsletter Statecraft, which is just extremely long form, giga nerdy podcast deep dives of like very high leverage people in government and like what their actual job is. I think it's one of the only places that you can understand, like,
That's cool.
on a day-to-day basis, what does the Office of Management and Budget do? Like, what does the Office of Personnel Management do? The Domestic Policy Director of the United States, like, what does that mean? What are they accountable for? And Asante is he's Dwarkesh level in his ability to ask penetrating, high resolution, well researched like questions that I think bring not only what the stuff is but why it matters into light and render it vivid. He's great, and he's actually in house at the Anthropic Institute right now. So all these people keep getting poached by labs, but they maintain their editorial independence. They do great work, and they also come from all the way across the political spectrum. So you're not just getting one particular angle of how any of this works.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like I learned many things today, and 4 in the last 5 minutes. So thank you. Yeah, I kind of know
Absolutely.
what's on your bucket list at this point? You mentioned like you'll be on Substack more over the next year, but what do you want to accomplish in the next 68 years or however many we
Yeah,
have left?
man. So I like, what a good question. I think after I left Wizards, it was, very important to me to dive back into the world of like social impact and ordinal value. And we started an organization to help young people like discover and pursue their passion and purpose. Something very important to me. I think as we were doing that, the act of what we call like social entrepreneurship or policy, basically like how to pursue ordinally socially valuable efforts, is a really important question, right? Like, I'm not one of these people that thinks like, oh, because like you're running a for-profit company, that must be bad. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, many of the most important things that have ever been done have been done in a way that like generates tons of money. I just also think that there's, you know, slices within the market of like really important imperatives that like there isn't a customer for, and that's what, government, philanthropy, everything else are engineered to solve. I think what we've been doing the last like 7 years has been kind of working at that early stage kind of intersection of like, okay, here's a really promising initiative. Here is a way to instantiate that in government. How do we make it as easy as possible to kind of cross the bridge from philanthropy to governance? But what I'm really interested in now is like that whole conversation. So I wrote a piece for this Stanford Social Innovation Review called "The Creative Paradigm of Social Value," about how to like, ironically, like use lessons from game design, from making movies, from the creative industries, to approach philanthropy and social impact in a different way. I think like what I have to contribute, to the extent that I have stuff to contribute, has to do with how we think about large scale social problem solving, and like what game mechanics we have available to us, that are being used and that are not being used. Right. I think there's way more we can be doing structurally than is kind of popular right now. But that requires us to capitalize it. It requires us to think about it the right way. It requires us to scope initiatives like that. Nan Ransahoff, another great follow, has been writing about all this. So I think I'm very passionate about kind of evangelizing the mechanics of social and civic innovation and popularizing stuff that we know is effective but isn't being done at like scale yet. But I think I'm even more passionate about how to like make meaning out of it and how to create meaning from this experience of life that we all inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that when I was young and writing was really important to me, I think the big weakness of my like writing and about the other stuff I tried to create is that I just fundamentally didn't know what I was talking about. Right. I'd like try to write a scene where there's like, people having a venture pitch or whatever. And it was just unrealistic. It was bad. I think like you get to a point where you live enough life that you know how to kind of depict stuff vividly. But I think you also hopefully like have enough of the wisdom to know like when the mean take is not quite the truth, but contains a kernel of it. And I think that, you get at a certain point in your life that like sharing that becomes something that becomes important to you. Right. So, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that most of the next decade it leans far more kind of in that storytelling, sense making dimension. I've got a comic coming out
Oh,
that
very
I'm
cool.
producing with Annapurna. That's exciting.
I didn't know that.
That can lead to more things. I'm going to follow up with you about this next game that we're doing. So I think there most of the last 15 years I'd be saying a lot about like scaling enterprises as initiatives or like going into government, working in that angle. I think the great thing about being in DC and being reasonably well connected in this world is like I know who like the great public servants are. I know who the great policy people are, and like I have a ton of respect for what they do, and I also know that while I think I'm good at those things, like I'm not at their level, right? But I think I do occupy like a nice position where I think I'm like, you know, creative enough, economic to like get how that works without being in it, close enough to like policy, civic governance stuff to like know how it works without being in it, and being in a pretty good position in the middle to kind of try and help all of us make sense of it all. So that's what I'm focused on for the next little bit. We'll see how it goes, but I'm
Yeah.
excited about it.
Yeah, it's funny how a bunch of us have emerged here. I talked to Justin Gary, and
Oh,
he's writing
sick!
a book about how game design applies to living life well, which
That's amazing.
is very very personal. His
Of
personal
course.
slant is different than mine, probably, but like
Oh yeah.
still, I can appreciate it. And you have Zvi off trying
Oh,
to
of
like give
course.
everyone like the best information he can in the world. So it's nice to see everyone like do it their own way, and try to make sense of what we've experienced as much as we can.
It's not on easy mode, that's for sure.
No, it is fun and rewarding though, for
Oh
sure.
yeah.
There's no doubt why people do it. Hmm. Yeah. So you're unique in that you've gone deep in so many different things. But if you're on a deserted island and you only get books, movies, TV, or um, games, what's the thing you choose? It's
I
hard, right?
think it's hard, right? It's like if you had to be blind or had to be deaf or whatever. I like to think I like to think that I choose games, but I'd probably choose books.
Yeah.
Uh, I when I'm on like a long plane, I was just coming back from Ukraine last week. I just sat. I had four books in my lap, and I just machine gunned four books. Uh, there's different books do different things. I think people often mischaracterize what a book is for. I think the biggest mischaracterization of a book is that it like downloads information into your skull. I think that's completely wrong. I think the whether it's fiction, whether it's nonfiction, a good book, I think the main thing it does is just increase your adjacency to other salient things. And what I mean by adjacency is like the style of thinking about a subject, the style of inhabiting a worldview, the style of practicing a domain. Like our brains are fundamentally like they're less computational than they are associational, and
Hmm.
they often associate at the level of like schema and symbol, right, which are all these like implicit grammar that if we don't have they can't function like non-linearly, right? Like we need some sort of closeness so that like associations between discrete concepts can triangulate to like a third thing, right? Don't yell at me in the crowd if you're a neurobiologist. I understand that that wasn't exactly right. But broadly speaking, that's what's going on, right? Like we aren't good with discontinuities. We're good with associational adjacencies past a certain point of legibility. They just become inaccessible, right? So whether what you're doing is like reading a piece of literature about a, you know, like late stage cancer patient, right? Or whether you're reading a piece of fiction about, what it's like for Abraham Lincoln to lose his child, or whether you're reading, nonfiction about how Jay Dilla makes music. Like the secondary thing that you're doing is trying to like download that information into your skull. The primary thing you're trying to do is just like inhabit the world of someone who's talking about it enough to be close enough to it that you can start to form inexact models that then you go through life and you experience dimensions of your life, and then those intersect with those models and those kind of perturb those models, and eventually something starts to take form. that like approximates the multidimensional phenomena that you care about. And I just think that books, it's really hard to do that in other media. I think all media can do it. I think cinema can do it. I think, Friday Night Lights, the TV show, is probably one of the
That's a good one.
most moral artifacts I've ever encountered. I think playing The Witness, I felt my brain being reprogrammed in real time. So I think every medium can do it, but I just think that like the batting average of like a good, robust book, man, it's just hard to beat, and it just feels so good when it happens.
What 5 do you bring?
What 5 books do I bring? All right, and we'll close out with this because I have to jump to a fundraising call after this.
Oh yeah.
I'll bring The Fabric of Reality by David Deutsch. I'll bring Infinite Jest because I have to say that. I'll bring Black Lamb and Gray Falcon by Rebecca West, my favorite piece of historiography. I'll bring, let's see, I'm looking at my book. Oh yeah, I've got to shout that out. I'll bring the Education of an Idealist by Sam Power,
Sure.
which I think is a beautiful thesis for why you should do anything. And I'll bring The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses by Jesse Schell, because to this day, I think that that's the best book on how to create anything that matters that I've ever read.
Yeah, it's a great book. All right, we'll talk after this. You go to your fundraising call.
Dude,
Thank you,
yeah.
everyone, for joining us. There's a bunch of people who showed up over the course of the call. But yeah, we should catch up, and it'll be cool seeing more.
I can't wait to follow up. It would be awesome to see more of you, talk more with you, build more with you. Can't wait to follow up, Brian. Thanks so much for reaching out.
Sounds good. All right. Good luck, man.
Cheers.
See ya.
Bye-bye.